We now welcome Dr. Peter Biar, who spent 2 years as a political prisoner in South Sudan. An activist and academic, he was arbitrarily detained by South Sudan's National Security Service from July 2018 to July 2020. Dr. Ajak, welcome.
Thank you, Under-Secretary Zaya, Secretary Blinken, Minister Lundbergis, Excellencies, distinguished guests. I'm grateful to President Biden for the opportunity to speak here today, and to the United States for many wonderful things it has done for me. Two of the great things were the chance to come here and study as a teenager, and more recently, getting me out of prison and saving my life, for which both I'm extremely grateful. I am deeply moved, Madam Under-Secretary, for what I have heard from my fellow panelists and the sincere advocacy, tirelessness on behalf of Maria, Agpar, and Jose, and others like them around the world who support those who fight, who stand up against tyrants, including Alexei Navalny in Russia and Siamak Namazi in Iran. My wife, children, and loved ones know your pain, concerns, and worries. Thank you. And I encourage you to remain strong and steadfast, regardless of intimidations and threat you may be facing. Whether it's torture or uncertainty, it's your resilience that will help your loved ones to endure the suffering they're undergoing. I still remember the terrifying screams of my fellow inmates during torture. I recall the uncertainty I felt throughout this order, whether I was next or whether I'd be grabbed from my cell in the middle of the night and transferred to a secret military facility outside of Juba, where many were executed and their bodies burned to ashes, such as Dong Samuel, Agri Idris, and Luala Kon, or whether I would still be under detention, like Kwera Wilkwir, who was arrested for supporting calls for peaceful protests. Indeed, political prisoners occupy an important role in the advancement of democracy because freedom does not come on its own. It requires people willing to fight for it, to defend it, to risk their lives for it. Therefore, not only must we fight for the lives and freedom of political prisoners, but we must help them realize the dreams for which they risked their lives in the first place. In my case, I dare to dream of a South Sudan that lives up to the aspiration of its people, for which 2.5 million people paid the ultimate sacrifice. Whether veterans, active soldiers, or average citizens, our genuine desire is for a democratic country that strives for the welfare of its citizens and that treats everyone with dignity and respect. And while we work day and night for this vision, we recognize that without the support of others that love freedom from around the world, our best efforts may fall short in the absence of their aid. Secretary Blinken, Minister Lundbergis, honored guests, South Sudan was born from the promise of democracy and midwife by the Troika of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway. These countries and others in our region, in Africa and around the world, were inspired by our people's struggle for a democratic future. Yet, our experience since independence has been a complete disaster. Just to cite one example, South Sudan scored only 2 out of 100 in this year's Fund for Peace Global Index. In addition, we have not had elections since 10 years since we gained our independence. I am 38 years old and I have never voted in my life. We were scheduled to hold elections in 2015, but the outbreak of conflict in 2013 was used as an excuse to push them to 2018. And when 2018 came, they were delayed yet again to 2021. And the revitalized peace agreement of 2018 extended them to 2022. And recently, because of the inability of the leaders of South Sudan to implement the peace deal on time, elections were pushed once again to 2023. The people of South Sudan are tired of being ruled by illegitimate leaders, often warlords, who access power through violence and the settlement of violence rather than through democratic contestations. We are often told that this approach will stabilize South Sudan before our people can exercise democracy. But we know deeply in our hearts that lasting democracy, rather than a mere facade of it, comes from domestic politics built on consensus and peaceful contestation of ideas, with electorates as final arbiters through universal suffrage. It's time for South Sudan, our neighbors, African Union, with Troika and others as partners, to ensure South Sudanese people finally exercise democracy through the conduct of internationally supervised elections by 2023. This is doable, Madam Undersecretary. There is already a UN peacekeeping force in the country and a presence of the international community that is present in the country, that is keeping that country standing. Let's ensure that people of South Sudan get the right to vote. And while our first election will be messy, they will provide an important reference point that the only legitimate and lasting means for accessing and exercising power is through the consent of the governed. It will bring back to the people of South Sudan the hard-fought agency and right to shape their own destiny. We call on those committed to the advancement of freedom anywhere in the world to invest in the young people of South Sudan, to assist them to organize themselves and help them upgrade their capabilities to build a viable state. With such support, you would have aided us to bring forth that bright South Sudan for which millions of our martyrs sacrificed their lives. And you would have ensured that my suffering and the suffering of others like me was not in vain. Let me stop there. Back to you, Madam Undersecretary.
Thank you, Dr. Ajak, for reminding us of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of anti-democratic repression. And I want to thank all of our courageous speakers for giving voice to those who could not be with us today. You are not alone, and your family members are not forgotten. Statements by all four of our panelists remind us that the scourge of detaining political prisoners can be found in many parts of the world. The United States calls for the immediate and unconditional release not only of Maria Kolesnikava, Ekbar Assad, and Juan Sebastián Chamorro, but of all political prisoners held worldwide. To quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from his 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Dr. King's words are a sobering reminder that we all have a responsibility to take a stand when we see injustice. The authoritarian regimes of the world will, of course, continue to deny that they take or hold any political prisoners. But we must persist in identifying them and calling for their release. Now, with the brief amount of time we have left, I would love to hear a last word from each of our four panelists who opened. If there's a point you'd like to reiterate to our audience of governments and civil society on what they can do to help the plight of political prisoners around the world. Tatiana, can we start with you?
Of course, sure. Thank you very much. Yes, I want to thank you and the Secretary. Thank also Secretary Blinken, also Ministry Landsbergis. And I heard a lot of very useful and familiar for me steps that are already taken by different countries. And I want to thank you for doing it. I want to thank you also for involving other countries. I think this is really important to do it, who will fight for human rights and release of political prisoners in Belarus and in all other countries. This is really important. And I also want to remind about some small steps, yes, that exist for ordinary people in different countries. yes, please write letters to political prisoners because they are afraid to be forgotten. This is really dangerous for them. Go on and make demonstrations in your countries and towns. Support human rights NGO and organizations. Raise situation of political prisoners to your politicians in your countries and your cities so that they react to human rights violations in Belarus. You can share all the information, video, and so on human rights situation in Belarus and other countries that is maybe closer to you and more interested in. So small steps support and help a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I was heartened to be able to support this letter writing campaign myself when I was recently in Vilnius. Now, Rehan, could we hear a last word from you?
Here's my message to world leaders and general public. There's nothing more noble than fighting for human freedom and dignity. Every day when victims like my brother, concentration camps victims or political prisoners, when their lives waste away in these camps and prisons, our dignity as bystanders drains away with theirs. Dr. Ajak's case is a prime example of using diplomacy to bring about change and fighting for human freedom. So I really hope world leaders and countries use the diplomatic tools they have to fight for human freedom. And last, I would love to say that countries like Lithuania has been truly a champion for human rights. And I really hope many countries to channel their energy, their dedication, and their fight for justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, Victoria, would you like to share a last word?
Yes, Undersecretary. As you mentioned, this is a humanitarian catastrophe. While we are living in all these authoritarian countries that have authoritarian regimes, these are human beings being tortured in these cells. So we need the coordinated pressure of the international community to put pressure on these governments to free our loved ones. Each day is important. Each day they are there. It's very dangerous. Their health, their well-being, their dignity is being violated. Thank you for this space, which is so important to let our voices be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And now, Peter, would you like to share a last word with our audience?
Yes, indeed. I want to say this has really been a great honor for me to speak here and to share my ideas and perspective on this topic. And I want to encourage everyone watching that they can make a difference and they cannot just leave it to their government to be the only one advocating for the release and freedoms of political detainees. They themselves can do something. And in my case, not only my family, my wife in particular, but also because I had a chance to come and live in the US when I was a teenager, my American family, the church that I used to grow up in, my classmate from high school and from university, from graduate school, my classmate in the UK, my friends that I met from all walks of life, they signed petitions, contributed money, and wrote letters, both demanding my release from South Sudanese government authorities, my professors, both at Harvard and at LaSalle, some of whom end up advocating for me in the halls of Congress. My representatives, when I was here in the US, everyone was involved. And it showed that this is a fight for everyone that believes in freedom, and everyone can make a difference. So let's do something to free those who are in prison, and let's not leave it to our governments. Let's also be agent of a difference in this struggle.
Thank you all for your courage, your commitment, and your activism. On behalf of the United States, I'd like to thank our Lithuanian co-hosts, all our speakers, and everyone around the world who tuned in. This event is being recorded and will be available for follow-up viewing through the Department of State website. Goodbye for now, and thank you.